Good evening and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me this evening. We've got a lot to cover today, but I already want to say thank you to Lucille and Jerry, who've both already hopped in. So glad to see you here as well. We're going to go ahead and jump right into the thick of things in just a moment here. We got a lot to cover, like I said. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first item on the list. And this is a commentary from Pika Kalionamieme. Sorry, my apologies to that person who apparently have not had enough practice on their name yet. He lays out the case for this, for what's going on with Russia. And it comes down to Russia invaded a country at the heart of Europe, completely demolishing its cities and killing its civilian population. They assassinate people in European countries with painful nerve agents and radioactive substances. That's the reason why there's the joke about the polonium tea. Sabotages European weapons factories, runs a sophisticated spy illegal network around Europe, interferes with elections and provokes civil unrest, uses GPS jamming against civilian planes, sabotages Europe's energy infrastructure, sends waves of migrants who are probably joined by spies and agent provocateurs to the European Union, bribes European politicians so that they would promote pro-Kremlin narratives for local audiences, spreads propaganda and disinformation on a massive scale, and nationalizes Western companies and equipment worth billions of euros. And of course, the response is they're paying even more taxes to Russia through their banking system. So this is just to me, this is just a reminder that Russia is at war with the West. It doesn't matter if we have actually acknowledged it. They're waging that war. They're using asymmetric warfare of the political, social, economic spheres, limited violence, terrorism. They're doing all these things. It's effectively waging a war on the West. Every country, every citizen, every politician, every power structure, every constitution, every Bill of Rights, every Magna Carta. They are waging war on the West because they cannot afford to have a prosperous West looking right at them over their border, because the Russian people will see it and then respond eventually. And that's why what we're looking at right here, the kind of a good summary of what's been going on, what's the fact that Russia is at war with the West, even if we don't acknowledge it. Anton Herischenko put in actually provided this information from Danish military expert Anders Nielsen, saying that a long war actually plays into the hands of Ukraine, not Russia. So let's go through his items right here. On the long war, there are some factors in the Russian war economy that mean it will get gradually harder for Russia to keep the war going. Russia's military capability is at a peak right now, but if we look 2 or 3 years into the future, it will start to decline. Soon, Russia won't have more equipment left in the stocks that they inherited from the Soviet Union, and it does not have time to produce new equipment on the scale necessary for such a war. In addition, sooner or later, they will start to run out of money to fund the war. The long-term trends actually favor Ukraine, but it requires that they can hold the line this year and stabilize the flow of supplies. With the announcement of $60 billion in U.S. aid and the flow of weapons into Ukraine, we are probably trending closer to an optimistic scenario. And then he talks about the Russian offensive for a little bit. Russians have some units in reserve that they seem to be preparing for a summer offensive. The fighting that is taking place right now is a kind of prelude to a bigger offensive that will come maybe next month. And that does line up with the other sources I'm seeing on this that are discussing a potential for a Russian offensive starting sometime in the May-June timeframe. Why Russia destroys Ukrainian cities. When the big invasion started in 2022, the goal was to have a regime change so that there would be a new government in Kyiv that the Russians could control. But after a month, it became clear the blitzkrieg failed, Ukraine held its ground, and the West helped it. Now, a free, prosperous, and democratic Ukraine is a regime security risk for Putin himself. If at some point there is an uprising in Russia, then such a Ukrainian state can push the needle and cause the Putin regime to lose power. The current Russian strategy is the following: to take as much territory as they can during this current active phase of fighting, and then to turn the rest of Ukraine into a failed state because they cannot allow the rest of Ukraine to become a free, prosperous, and successful nation. Again, this is from Anders Nielsen. I'm going to go ahead and link to Anton Herashchenko's post. You can go straight to Anders' video for it if you want to see more details on that. But looked at from this perspective, it means that gradually, while Russia's managed to ramp up their production of their war materiel, what they're producing now is not the quality of the equipment that they have lost. Yes, they're now losing equipment like T-72s, T-62s, T-55s as their tanks, but those are their Soviet stockpiles. And once those are gone, they're not going to fire up those production lines again. They are producing small batches of T-90 tanks, as I understand it, around 5 per month. But even those are going to be restricted in the electronics and capabilities that they'll have, because Russia will have to go through a whole bunch of hoops to potentially get some past sanctions. So even if they can bypass it at the small scale, it won't be enough to get them the latest hardware, the latest equipment, the latest air defenses, the latest missiles. They can do rate production on these things only as much as they can get the necessary vital electronics through the sanctions regime. That doesn't mean they can't, just means that's what they're facing. This video shows an attack on Odesa from just actually the last night. And you can see here the indications of a cluster munition attack. This was on a park. There were 2 people and a dog that perished in this attack. This was not attacking a military facility. It wasn't attacking a military structure. This was entirely a terrorist attack, effectively, on a civilian population in a city. That's where Russia's going. And it looks like this might be because the Ukrainians hit a whole bunch of military hardware in Crimea. So Russia's, of course, like, we got to do whatever we can do. So we'll attack the civilian population in Odesa. This is a common theme that they seem to go over repeatedly. The prosecutors, I believe these are the International Criminal Court prosecutors, state that the Russians are using cluster munitions against Odesa, and that this points to deliberate targeting of civilians. Clearly, there is no military value in attacking a random park in Odesa. Therefore, it's targeted at Ukrainian civilians. One of the people that did perish in this was the vice rector of the International Humanitarian University. That would be Boris Vasilev. And this was confirmed by the educational institution. Once again, a civilian who perished in this attack. By the way, I do see Jana is here. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. Always glad to have you here. One other way that Russia has been engaging in warfare against the West. They have been doing this hybrid campaign directly targeting NATO states, including using GPS jamming and sabotaging military logistics in NATO members' territory. I kind of mentioned this yesterday, GPS jamming that Russia's been carrying out. Now, you have to understand that modern aircraft make heavy use of GPS points and targets to navigate to and successfully get to the places they're supposed to be. If they cannot use GPS, they have to fall back on older and less accurate methods of doing the same. That's one thing. Now, my understanding back in the day is that they used to use what's called VHF, omnidirectional radio, I think it is, but I'm not sure. It's basically what the R is on that. But the VORs were actually basically a radio signal that would tell you how far you are from a certain tower, and you could just you could use that to navigate from. Those became your beacons. But many of those VOR systems, number one, that was pioneered in the United States, and I don't think it caught on to the same extent over in Europe. But the in the United States, they've been decommissioning these VOR systems here. This old legacy hardware that would be basically immune from effective jamming at any distance or range. This is they don't have that to the same extent in Europe, so, and they have not planned or plotted some of their airfields and airports for to use these type of legacy systems. So you're either down to visual flight rules or you don't fly. And if you are in the flight when your GPS suddenly gets jammed, well, you're running a big risk. And it's just a matter of time before those that GPS jamming will actually cause an accident. There's no question in my mind. Financial Times reported on April 29th, according to the Institute for the Study of War, that Baltic ministers are warning that Russia is behind the recent cases of GPS jamming that have interfered with commercial navigation signals and forced 2 Finnair flights to return back in the middle of flights from Helsinki to Tartu in the past week. They estimate the GPS jamming has affected tens of thousands of civilian flights in recent months. The outlet Sun also reported on April 23rd that suspected Russian GPS jamming impacted over 3,000 UK civilian flights over the Baltic region. And British officials also believe that Russia jammed the satellite signal of Royal Air Force jets that was transporting British Defense Secretary Grant Shapps back to the UK from Poland. So we've got a variety of this hybrid warfare going on. Now, Jerry, you tell me, do modern aircraft, passenger aircraft have inertial guidance systems in them? I don't know, and that's the reason why I'm asking. I've not been able to find that in the in that situation. Stephen, you are correct. They're not completely dependent on GPS. It is a nuisance and it is a distraction, but it would be with some of these airports, they never actually set up the necessary plots for the non-precision approaches and things like that they would have to do without the GPS. That's one of the problems I've been, at least according to what I've been reading with Tartu. So yeah, the plane's not going to fall out of the sky. The question is going to be, are they going to know it? And are they going to be able to successfully navigate in weather adverse conditions if they don't? Now, I mean, obviously you get up at altitude, you aren't going to run into any mountains. You stay up there until you can get out of that region and get out of the GPS jamming. Voila. There's a lot of things that can be done. And in fact, as Jerry says, that the Lockheed L-1011 had an inertial navigation system. So yeah, there's options. But it's a danger, especially especially for the perspective of they track a lot of their flights using these GPSs as well. So keep that in mind, something to keep in mind. That GPS jamming is pretty darn robust, I might add. This is the map that talks about the Estonia jammer and their likely location just outside of St. Petersburg. There's also been indications of one in Kaliningrad. So we've got the Russians effectively jamming civilians in the middle of this. They're not involved in this war. Now, one of the things we mentioned the other day was this, there was talk of Ukraine forcing young men to come back to Ukraine. That has been retracted, saying that Ukraine is not planning to forcibly bring back military-aged men who are in the EU, according to Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, Olha Stefanishyna. This was mentioned in an interview with Deutsche Welle, published on April 30th. Makes a lot more sense, and it's something to keep in mind. They can't actually force these people to return, but they would work with those who are willing to return and fulfill their military service. Lithuania did express support for helping Ukraine bring back their military-aged men living abroad, but that's after there's consultations with the European Union and Ukraine. Ukraine needs to have its mobilization plans, and Ukraine must have means and instruments to invite its young men to serve their homeland. We must cooperate with Ukraine in every sense. Cooperate, not force. And Estonia also said they have no plans to forcibly send Ukrainian draft-age men out of Estonian territory. Again, this is not intended to be force people to do it. They want people to return voluntarily and serve their country. So that's a nice update on that situation. Let's go ahead and move on to the situation out of Ukraine itself. We mentioned the missile attack on Odesa having cluster munitions. President Zelensky said that aid delivery has to speed up for Ukraine to disrupt Russian plans. And this is there's been indications there have been enough delays already. They're having trouble getting this equipment into Ukraine and into the front lines. The U.S. President spoke, Karine Jean-Pierre, don't remember her position right now, White House Communications, there we go, says that aid is already arriving. Is it? I don't know for sure. I've not seen it from any other reliable source. According to a poll, 70% of Ukrainians feel negatively towards Russians, with more than a third also feeling negatively towards Belarusians. So I can't really blame them, to be honest. President Zelensky clarified Ukraine will join NATO only after defeating Russia, not before. He wants his country intact and ready and available in the event before they join NATO. So there's no question about legal standing, no question about issues there. And from Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, TNMK Munitions collected more than 2 million, specifically 2,014,960 hryvnias in order to purchase combat boats. That's an interesting little bit there. And hey, good work for that musical group in getting that done. Moving over to news out of Russia. A wave of Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries deep inside Russia has left the world's largest nation facing a petrol shortage. Somebody described Russia as a gas station with nukes, and now it looks like they're not much of a gas station either. Diesel prices for Russian consumers have skyrocketed nearly 10% in the last week, and the cost of petrol has also hit a 6-month high and risen more than 20% since the start of the year. As refining capacity drops, their ability to bring diesel and petrol to the market has been greatly reduced, and we all know they're going to prioritize those fuels for their military vehicles, not for the civilian population. In fact, these drone strikes in the deep heart of Russia have led to the fact that Russia has scaled back its fuel exports to near historic lows, shipping just over 712,000 tons of diesel and gas oil last week, compared to more than 844,000 during the same week in 2023. This will gradually knock out their ability to sell this fuel and this oil overseas, because they'll need it for their domestic purposes. Now, Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, states that over the past year, Russia has produced new weapons, including ammunition, missiles, tanks, and armored vehicles, faster than ever before in its history. I think that we might also look at how fast they've burned through those vehicles. Is it faster than they've ever burned through those vehicles in modern history either? We'll have to find that out. Satellite images reveal that there are fake Tu-22s and Su-24 aircraft painted on the airfield at Mozdok Air Base. This is a common theme for Russia right now, trying to hide their actual numbers from the ability to be able to spy on them. Well, there's only 6 of these Tu-22 M3 strategic bombers stationed there now, and the rest appear to be just painted on the sidewalk. Tarmac. According to a top Chechen rebel officer, and I'm going to put a timeout on this, while this source is usually very reliable, it's also the only one I saw talking about this one in specific, and so treat this one with a grain of salt. A top Chechen rebel officer says preparations for rebellion against the Kadyrov regime are in full swing. With the illness that Ramzan Kadyrov has and the apparent indications that it's fatal, There are Chechen rebels that are looking at opportunities to overthrow his rule and therefore potentially separate themselves from Russia. We'll see. Now, we often talk about the Ukrainians getting absolutely hammered by Russian missiles and drones. It's not all one way, and I want you to just understand that there are drones flying into Russia most every night, and there are attacks being carried out. In this case, a 23-year-old military man died during shelling of the Kursk region. A conscript was also wounded. This is just the soldiers. Now confirmed reports of like oil refineries and other facilities and military airfields. This is just mentioning that it goes beyond just that we can see. Forest fire season has begun in Russia. Residential areas are burning in Buryatia. Thing is that a lot of their firefighters are over in Ukraine dying. So they are having trouble both staffing and keeping their equipment running, fuel, et cetera, like that. It's going to be a rough fire season for Russia. This is a story of petty revenge. In the Tver region, they will not lay asphalt on a street because of a resident who respects Zelensky and cries for Navalny. The head of the Oleniski Municipal District of the Tver region, Oleg Dubov, said in an interview with local television that he would leave Shkolnaya Street, where a man who shares democratic views lives, without repairs. Residents of the village have been demanding road repairs for several years. But this year, Shkolnaya Street was removed from this list because one of its residents has a non-traditional political orientation and also sought restoration of the surface for, quote, political purposes. I am not going to play this video. I'm going to link to it instead. If you want to see it, you can see it at your time. This one is disturbing because if you play it, you'll see a Russian soldier going through looking at a whole bunch of dead Russian soldiers in the Avdiivka area. This is an insane number of dead men that show how much Russia is paying in bodies to take every bit of the territory that they're claiming. It's a tough one for them. That said, they got a lot more bodies to throw into it. And according to Crimean Wind, the Russian Federation is actively implementing the use of Albatross M5 drones in the combat zone, which is used to search for targets using the Kaspersky neural networks. These Albatross drones have basically an intelligent AI system that looks for potential targets. It's yet another drone that Russia is fielding. And a polyethylene warehouse is burning down in the Moscow suburb of Ramenskoye. I have no clue if this is war-related. It just seems to stand out as an unusual item to be burning at this time. So that's the news out of Russia itself. Let's talk about that whole thing with Crimea. An ATACMS missile wave hit Crimea overnight, with the news platform saying that this was a long-range version of the U.S. weapon, though Ukraine has not yet confirmed this. Of course, as always, Russia says all missiles were intercepted, all of them were shot down, there was no damage taken by it. Let's take a look at how this really looks. A wave of Ukrainian long-range weapons, widely reported to be around a dozen U.S.-made ATACMS ballistic missiles, pounded air bases and air defense installations across Crimean Peninsula early Tuesday morning in one of the beefiest armed forces of Ukraine long-range attacks yet against the Kremlin-occupied territory. It started around 2 a.m. with explosions and air raid warnings in Simferopol and Sevastopol and the towns of Vardinsky, Evpatoria, and Zankoy. Now, we know that they hit several of the airfields through there and the air defense systems right in the area. Russians again say that all the incoming weapons were shot down, that anything that after the ATACMS missiles were shot down, they scattered cluster munitions. I will talk about this in just a moment here, and I've got a link to it that talks about this in more detail. They were directed at targets near Simferopol and Zankoy. Now, the social media from Crimea itself says no, 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 no. There has been a lot of successful strikes here. There have been hits to anti aircraft systems, Russian aircraft, command and control centers, and military casualties. There's also accounts of cluster munitions successfully deployed and scattered over targets. In Zankoy, the military airfield was hit with at least 2 weapons, killing and wounding service personnel and damaging helicopters. The independent Russian news agency Astra reported a probable ATACMS hitting Zankoy base, wounding 5 service personnel and lighting fires. Multiple NATO reconnaissance aircraft swept through the airspace above the Black Sea. And they did not give specific information on that, but just we're doing general collection. But overall, we're looking at some pretty effective deployment of these long-range ATACMS missiles. This is the Astra post on the same information there. Crimean Wind reports that 3 separate military units of the Russian Air Defense Forces were attacked. That includes Zankoy, Simferopol, and the military facilities of the Black Sea and Saki regions, with 4 Russian military personnel wounded in Chernomorsky. The Null reports puts it as more than 10 explosions were heard in Vardisk, Zankoy, Hnechesk, and Simferopol, with the Crimean Bridge also being closed and a large, powerful explosion in Mariupol. Even Russian mill blogger Rybar has reported on this pretty extensive strike and says that over 30 of these longer range ATACMS have been hitting in Crimea over the past 2 weeks. Other sources, this time Dmitry from War Translated, talking about it, saying that the number of missiles is 11 to 15, and the expected, they're saying that it looks like it was a successful one. Now, let's go back to that purported cluster munition. This looks like a softball or maybe a baseball-sized object. Note that it has no ridges on the sides, nothing that would indicate what it is. The U.S. ATACMS cluster munitions have these grenades in them. They've got these fins on them. They are painted green, not this white round ball. And Tindar also reported on the situation over there with a lot of successful attacks being reported. Though Russians claim the Tindar states that Russians claim that this was all ATACMS missiles, but haven't provided any proof. They then say that if the Ukrainian army keeps this pressure up, it is possible that the Russian air bases in Crimea will share the same fate as the Berdyansk air base, which, after bombardment by ATACMS missiles, was abandoned by the Russian occupation. That's Crimea right there, and boy, is it a lot of stuff going on. It has been absolutely nuts across Crimea the last few days. Let's go ahead and get into the international stuff, which is, there's a lot here as well, though not as much as the other day. From the Kyiv Independent, they report that Carl Bildt, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, said, "While Putin doubtless will have prepared for new offensive operations, I suspect he has been banking more on Trump riding to the rescue than on his own forces." Now, other people have mentioned that Putin would not be relying on Donald Trump in particular, and Donald Trump has recently reversed his position on Ukraine yet again, stating that they would send even more and then yelling at Europe to send even more. So, while this may be true, this is definitely a risky move if Vladimir Putin is doing so. Israel is reportedly mothballing their Patriot launchers, but they did not say what's going to happen to these systems after they're retired. Now, you know why it's in here? Because Ukraine could absolutely use a bunch of these Patriot missiles desperately. So why are they mothballing Patriots right now? Now they've got their Iron Dome and David's sling and all the other systems like that. They probably have it covered. It'd be interesting considering that Israel has already said after Russia's betrayal that they would be helping Ukraine once they got their situation sorted out. Interesting. Just going to say it's interesting. Latvia announced a new military aid package for Ukraine, which includes some air defense and intelligence capabilities. Um, we've talked about in the distant past now that Europe was pretty addicted to Russian oil and gas. In fact, they were importing a tremendous amount of the stuff and sending a lot of their money to Russia. And now that has generally been knocked out. There's still some that remains, but mostly they've gotten off of Russian natural gas and fuel. However, Europe is increasingly becoming dependent on Russian fertilizer as it previously did with Russian energy, according to Svein Thor Hilsether, the chief executive of fertilizer producer Yara International. Anything where you are depending on Russia as your supplier is something that you need to avoid in any way you can, because Russia is definitely an unreliable partner as far as freedom and the ability to do your business without it getting seized by the state. And if they can get the Europeans dependent on fertilizer, they can hold it over their head until they can cut it off. The Icelandic Parliament adopted a resolution on long-term assistance for Ukraine from 2024 to 2028. Iceland is far away from the situation there, and yet they are definitely putting their money where their mouths are. However, in something that is probably a long shot here, Macron says he hopes to convince Xi to sway Putin toward ending the invasion of Ukraine. That might be a tall order for Xi Jinping to pull off. And I have seen no evidence that Xi Jinping wants to call him off. Germany put some additional stuff into Ukraine's hands, including 10 Marder infantry fighting vehicles, a Skynex air defense system, ammunition for Leopard 2 tanks, Iris-T SLM air defense missiles, and other aid in their latest aid delivery. France said most of the countries of the European Union have been affected by Russian internet propaganda ahead of the upcoming elections to the European Parliament, which will be held in early June. This is, I think, entirely expected. Russia's going to do everything they can at this point in time to cause problem and trouble in the West. They definitely do not want aid going to Ukraine in any way they can. And according to Deputy Minister of National Defense for Poland, Paweł Zalewski, Poland has submitted an official application for the deployment of NATO nuclear weapons. They are just asking that they consider placing them on Polish territory. And this is a bit of a 180. If there's one thing that having a relatively peaceful Russia could have resulted in, it's a situation where nobody would really want the risks of nuclear weapons on their territory. And yet now people are clamoring for it because they see what happens if you don't have them. And then there was this I'm going to call it analysis, though the name of Swampy the Swamp Thing is certainly not exactly inspiring confidence, but I've researched this in a few other places, and I believe that this one's relatively accurate. Sentiment in Japan is strongly turning towards allowing the export of weapons, specifically to Ukraine. Why would that matter? As Japan has developed newer and better, they have mothballed their existing equipment. Well, let's look at what they could send. Now, of course, he also talks about why this would be the case, and one of the reasons is that the Japanese delegation visited Bucha, the location of a tremendous amount of war crimes committed by Russia. But they are already retiring their F-2, which is basically a clone of the F-16. They also could upgrade some of their F-15J fleet, with 145 of those being potentially surplus to requirements. The Type 74 was a really good tank for its day, and if there's a place in Ukraine for Leo 1s, and potentially even sourcing M60s for Ukraine, there'd definitely be a place for these rather effective little pieces of gear, with 870 of them mothballed since March of this year. The Type 90 main battle tank. This is not yet retired, but it is superseded by the newer T10. Up to 340 of these may become progressively available over time. There are self-propelled guns, with in 2008 Japan retiring 200 of these in favor of their newer ones. And of course, this is all just potential and possibilities. But the truth is that Japan is looking at a much more dangerous world than even during the Cold War right now. And their long vaunted absolute neutrality is no longer going to be enough to keep them safe in a modern world. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of the front lines here, and it's news. We'll just put it that way. Russian forces secured additional marginal tactical gains northwest and southwest of Avdiivka, but have not made significant advances in this direction over the last 24 hours. So basically, they're securing their existing gains overall. And while they have the opportunity to choose among multiple tactical directions for future offensives, that remains unclear where they will focus their efforts in the near future. The deep state map did update today. Ukrainian forces, that's one of those days. Ukrainian forces have advanced near Yampalivka. Now, this is near Terny, which has been a hot spot on the front off and on for basically the last year. And every time the Russians manage to advance, the Ukrainians kick them right back again. So it seems that they're in the middle of kicking them back again once more. Ukrainian forces reported 2 failed attempts by the Russians to try and retake the island of Nistria, and this resulted in a lot of losses on Russia's side. Oh, let's back up to the deep state map here. There are a couple other things. Russians captured Keramik and Novokolonove. These are near Avdiivka. And advanced near Novo-Oleksandrivka. There we go. And Orozhine. The situation, they say, in Robotna is being clarified. I've got more information on that in a bit. This video is just a fun one here. If you watch, that is a Russian flag on the left bank of the Dnieper River. That's the side that Russia pretty much has control of. And they had a spare grenade, and they had to time the explosion just right. So they drop it at the front lip of the building, and it rolls down until it explodes practically right next to the flag, blowing a significant chunk off the roof. So even though it is a symbolic win, sometimes you need to have those symbolic wins. These are the numbers of the equipment losses as of April 26, 2024 in the Pokrovsk Ryan offensive direction. In summary, 1,040 Russian vehicles lost and 166 Ukrainian vehicles lost. There's a lot of details in this. I'm just going to drop the link for you if you really want to dive into the numbers. But just understand that every yard that Russia's taking has a vehicle it loses attached. Robotna. Now, this is War Gonzo. They take it from the Russian perspective. They say it's too early to talk about the complete, I'm going to call it, capture of Robotna. Yes, assaults are taking place every day, but those infantry advances, which are achieved with great difficulty, cannot yet be called a breakthrough success. And they say there's no cover left in the village, that they're having to hide under burnt out vehicles in order to hide. And as soon as they see somebody, they're swarmed with drones. And overall, the situation remains, as he calls it, in a gray zone. And this is their evening update for this evening. No change in the Zaporizhia front area that they can report, although we did mention Robotna, still watching that area. Krasnohorivka, of course, the Russians advanced, as well as Netalovo. There we go. And there are no significant changes in the Uman lines of control. Overall, the Russians do have the advantage right now across these areas, and that much is pretty clear. Intel Crab reported it simply as Russian gains near Ocheratina are accelerating. And if they're accelerating, that means they're pouring more resources into those areas to try and keep that advance moving forward. And that's the situation on the front lines. Now I got a couple of extra items, and then after that I'm going to go into other news, both world and U.S., There'll be a lot of opinion and things like that, but let me get these done real quick. This video, I'm going to try and zoom it in a little bit here. That is a KH-101 missile, I believe, being chased by a Ukrainian air-to-air missile, which right there is the air-to-air missile. You can see it going much faster than the missile it's chasing. We don't know if it impacted, but that is an unusual bit of footage to capture. To be able to capture that missile being effectively working on being intercepted by Ukrainian forces. Yeah, KH-101. Now, if you'll remember, this woman with the cane and the stick, she walked 10 kilometers to cross the Russian front lines and cross Ukrainian front lines and be evacuated from Otratina. And she said it quite simply, she wanted to be free. And Stas Olenchenko states, here is a simple truth that many foreign political commentators can't seem to understand about Ukrainians. Russian occupation is much worse than war for us. And that is, from everything I have seen, the honest truth. They know what it's like under Russian control. And they're definitely giving it bad reviews. Especially those who have seen it the most brutal and for the longest time, like 98-year-old Lydia here. And that's everything that's directly about Ukraine. So I got some other stuff from Europe, got some other stuff from the United States here that I want to talk about, and some opinion stuff to go through. So if you're just here for Ukraine, it's glad to have you here. Always wonderful to have you, and thank you for being here. If you appreciate the news from the Ukraine war, absolutely hit me with that thumbs up on the video. Now, as far as the other news goes, and for those who are deciding to stay, thank you very much. I think there's some pretty good and pretty important information here. From India, the Bagdogra Air Base, a key base for the Indian Air Force during its Doklam crisis, has been undergoing extensive renovation, improving its capacity and capability. Recent imagery highlights the scale and significant progress achieved at this critical site on the front line with China. And that's the key bit there. This is on the front lines with China. The Indians and the the Indians and the Chinese don't get along. They absolutely are enemies in every respect here. They have had little skirmishes many times. And if they're expanding this air base here, it means they're thinking something might be brewing. At least that's my opinion. 2 U.S. sanctioned officials will join Serbia's new government. These are basically people that have been heavily involved in Russian politics or are Russian assets. And they are very much a vital part of Vucic's government over there, which should tell you what kind of government Serbia's got going on over there right now. This is from 2 days ago, but I didn't have the chance to report it at the time. According to U.S. Navy officials, on the 28th of April at 3:40 in the morning, a vehicle attempted to enter Expeditionary Base Little Creek Fort Story in Norfolk, Virginia. They ran the front gate, causing security forces to place the base on lockdown and raise the hydraulic access barriers, which the vehicle subsequently collided with and caught fire before exploding. The on-base fire service was activated and the fire was extinguished. However, the driver was declared dead at the scene. Incidents being investigated. Now, we saw a similar event happen over on the Canadian border between the U.S. and Canada, where a vehicle went at high speed and struck a barrier and exploded. At the time, they said there was no terrorism connection. And I'm not disputing that yet. But this seems like a pattern is starting to form of vehicles making high-speed runs at critical infrastructure, important locations, and then when they are stopped dead in their tracks, they explode. So I am concerned here. Now, I believe this is a special forces training base, so They really didn't want to get onto this base. But I am looking to see if I can find more information on this one, if they've gotten some additional information from the investigation. I just have a hard time believing, even at 3:40 in the morning, it was some drunk driver at full tilt and his car, and he wrecked into the. They put up the barriers. So they're basically pop up posts that stop any vehicle from getting through, and that stopped the vehicle from getting through. That's not supposed to cause the vehicle to catch on fire, and certainly not supposed to explode. So, what's going on? Georgia's, I don't think this goes with the next part, so hang on with me a second. I'm going to move this over a touch and pick up with this one. This is from the United States. There were 5 girls from Lincoln Middle School in West Virginia who were protested having to go compete against a trans student in the shot put. They refused to participate. And now those 5 students, those 5 girls, have been banned from school sports, leaving the trans girl to the trans individual to compete instead. As this is from the perspective of somebody who has young daughters and sons, I know what the differences are. And there is no way that a young lady can compete at the same level as a similar young man. This is the fact that this is even a question in our modern day and age, that there is any way in which young girls are competing against young boys in these situations. It boggles the mind. Biology demands it. The biology, basic science. But the fact that the girls are the ones that got banned gets my hackles up just a little bit. Ticks me off. That's just wrong. Now, this is from Georgia, the country, not the state. And Eto Buzashvili states, is this the Yanukovych moment of Georgia's oligarch? Bidzina Ivanishvili, the oligarch behind ruling Georgian Dream, confirmed yesterday what we have observed since he came to power in 2012. He announced a shift in Georgia's foreign policy and political repressions. And these are the highlights from his speech. He unequivocally labeled the U.S. and EU, the West in general, as a foreign enemy. He said that the West plans a coup to overthrow the Georgian government, drag Georgia into the war with Russia, and called the previous government a Western spy network. He labeled civil society as a domestic enemy, said that Georgian civil society is part of the Western spy network, along with the political opposition, and that neither can exist without Western support, and announced their destruction after the October elections. He mentioned Yanukovych, who was the Ukrainian president that was very much tightly tied with Putin. And he warned against challenging him, implying that while Ukrainians succeeded in defending their European future and ousting the pro-Russian government, the same will not occur in Georgia. And then this talks about this Russian-style foreign agents law for political repression, and they says they aim to exhaust civil society and media by focusing on this law now, leaving them with no capacity to defend the elections in October. Then he said that after the elections, the collective United National Movement will face moral and legal responsibility. This is the title of the former governing party, and Ivanishvili uses the terms collective UNM to describe anyone who disagrees with him. And then he announced that they would be going towards Russia, not the West. These are the words of a tyrant in the making. This is what happens when the United States steps back from the world stage and says, go to have fun, kids. This is what happens when the dictators and the bullies don't have their eyes blackened when they step into somebody else's territory. This is what happens. The protests have gotten simply massive in Georgia, Tbilisi, there were tens of thousands of people that were present for these massive rallies. This is where finally the police took a side. I imagine this is probably they had to bring in police in order to do this, because there were indications that some police were joining the protesters, and they began dispersing these protesters against this foreign agents law. Special forces used water cannons and tear gas to force protesters out. You can see some of that happening in the background there. Still, the protesters have been keeping at it and erecting barricades, trying to continue their protest. Now, you note something here. I'm going to mention this now. There's very few masks or people hiding their identity in these protests, you'll see. Even those that might have a mask have it down, and some that do, there's a few that still do. But by and large, these people are showing who they are on purpose. From Jason J. Smart, he states the brutal suppression of protests in Tbilisi, Georgia continues. The security forces managed to push demonstrators away from the parliament building, but people do not disperse. The protesters are opposing a new pro-Russian law by the government. That brings me back across the ocean one more time to the United States. There's been a similar batch of protests going on American university campuses across the nation, starting with Columbia University, but spreading to various other enclaves. And one of the things I noticed as I perused many of the pictures of these things was that in each case, by and large, the bulk of the tents were identical. Now, there were some where there was a different colors, but the model of tent was still the same. And in other cases, like you'll see a couple of random tents in the middle of this sea of identicals. So these protests, now I'm going to clarify, these are pro-Hamas protests. They're claim they're for the Palestinian people, but they're supporting Hamas over in Palestine, the Gaza Strip. There we go. That's the word. And these are not organic protests. There's been an arrest of a woman who is an actual protest, a professional protest consultant who was involved in this. She's in her 60s, definitely was not on campus for any reason that would involve going for an education. The students who are interviewed often have no clue what they're actually protesting for or against. They're taught chants. They are clearly being coached in what to say. Some of them have even stood up border controls, demanding that people stay out until they have been properly acknowledged by the border guards of their little protest camp. It's gotten so bad that one of the groups even went so far as to take a hostage, one of the cleaning crew of a building that they overran and captured. I don't remember which one it is. I just remember seeing it. That is beyond the pale here. David Marcus here reports that he went and talked to the people at UCLA. Most of them openly say they support Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization. They say the 10/7 atrocities, the murders and the sexual issues there didn't happen. The official line is even the New York Times debunked it. No, they didn't. They said it was justified. It was resistance. They said all of the people had the same narrative, trying to recenter the conversation to 1948, but had no details, no information, had no clue what they were talking about. He mentions they have their own security and control access to their own encampments. They remained calm but got aggressive and angry when they were questioned. When you approach junior members of the groups, they are given off to handlers, people who they show up quickly and take over. And they just don't know the facts. They're rent-a-mobs. Often there's some people there that came because they are probably true believers, but these are kids who are showing up to protest because they've been educated to protest. They don't know anything but protest is what their life is. That's why they go to college. That's what their college professors have been teaching them. In fact, in one case, the college professors, when the police came in to start doing arrests, the professors put on orange vests and formed a human chain. One professor tried to interfere in an arrest in progress. In fact, I don't think I have the video here. She tried to interfere with an arrest in progress, touched one of the officers, quote, hit him lightly on the head. She was hauled away screaming, I'm a professor, I'm a professor, thinking that that would make her immune to the consequences of assaulting a police officer. Now, if you want something that's going to absolutely shock you, here's the statement from Senator John Fetterman responding to the Speaker of the House, talking about the fact that the International Criminal Court is looking at bringing charges against Israel, specifically Netanyahu, about the war in basically the war in the Gaza Strip. And yet Fetterman, who was the senator elected from Pennsylvania, he had severe mental issues when he was elected, went through not rehabilitation, but went through some medical procedures, and he came out making an awful lot of sense. I don't know what they did to him in that hospital, but they must have done real good, because he has had more positive, good takes than any other Democrat I've seen in forever. But he stated, our politics diverge on many issues, talking about what Speaker Mike Johnson said, but intersect on this. This is a just war against Hamas, terrorists who designed and instigated the 10/7 massacre. The International Criminal Court shreds what credibility it has if it prosecutes Israel but ignores Hamas. And the raging on campuses continues apace, with some of the college protesters begging for amnesty as they await the consequences of their arrests. Now, in Florida, they immediately issued a letter saying that if these are the rules, you stay within these specific rules, no permanent encampments, you can carry signs, but no unintended signs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a short list of rules. You stay in those rules, you can stay and you can protest. You stop people from showing up, you threaten people, you set up camps and tents and all this kind of stuff, we're arresting you. And they did, and the University of Florida doesn't have a protest going on. I wanted to bring that up in this context, though, because it's clear that these types of protests are being managed. I'd even say stage managed. And I would say our enemies are loving what they're seeing. They have had small investments in propaganda pay off in huge measure in these protests, in all the other things in Western countries, where people are justifying terrorism. And it's wrong. Let's move on to domestic politics for a little bit here. From Nick Ballas, referring to a Politico article here. For months, the Biden administration has refused to name Qatar a state sponsor of terrorism for their support of Hamas. Qatar is the place where the Hamas leadership has been staying in very expensive, suites, and getting lots of, plenty well fed and well taken care of. And Qatar has been, shall we say, aggressive in their diplomacy on their behalf. Joe Biden, apparently, his brother was in business with the Qatari government officials. Is that why they're not on the state sponsor for terrorism? I don't know. The problem is it's one amongst many of the questionable things that surround the Biden family. Just so we're clear, there's plenty of questionable things going on around the Trump family as well. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Donald Trump, who has been in the news for a long time. Now, in the this is Lev Parnas. He was one of Donald Trump's news fixers. And he says in the 2016 presidential elections, Donald Trump had Michael Cohen and David Pecker to manipulate the public and hide the truth about him. In the 2020 presidential elections, Donald Trump had Rudy Giuliani, John Solomon, and myself, Lev Parnas, to manipulate the public and hide the truth about Joe Biden and Ukraine. All this was done for Donald Trump to win and stay in office. That's not to say I think everything is on the kosher when it comes to the prosecutions against Donald Trump. I absolutely believe that Donald Trump has done many things illegal. I believe he has shared intelligence with our enemies. I also believe that he was also set up in some of these aspects here. So, for instance, and I'm going to try and review a bit of this information from the classified documents story. This comes out of the filings in that lawsuit. And I'm going to summarize to the best of my ability here. Apparently, the GSA, the GSA held a large quantity of Trump's boxes in Virginia. These are the ones with documents and things like that for months upon months. Then one day they call up Trump and say, come and get this stuff, get it out of our possession here. You got to get them now. 6 pallets of documents. They were entirely in the hands of GSA. Plenty of time for them to do shady things with those things. In fact, these 6 pallets of boxes likely went to Mar-a-Lago and the storage facility in Palm Beach. So did they plant something in that? I don't know. What I can say is it looks shady as all get out. And watching this, all I can say is that if there's so much shade around these places that I'm not sure how any of them get enough sunshine to get their vitamin D. Evil people on both sides. And it scares the snot out of me right now. Not scares. It makes me mad. And that's the problem. Or as Stu Cameron said it, he's not an American, so why is he concerned about a Trump presidency? It's because he doesn't want the ruler of the world's main superpower to be a raving lunatic who is 100% focused on getting revenge. And the thing is that Donald Trump has made several statements lately about how he wants to get revenge on people. And it apparently was a theme of his private comments during his time in the White House. So once again, I am left with who is the righteous decision here. I'm not going to go into that today. I am just going to continue on for now. I was hoping to hear from Robbie Russell today before I did this stream, but I wanted to talk about this video of the Patriot Front. And these are, well, for one thing, they're marching mostly in step. They are all identically garbed to the point of looking like a uniform. They're reportedly white supremacists. They've got all common designs for shields and things like this. Professionally produced banners, this whole 9 yards. This, to my eyes, looks like a setup, not like an actual protest group, because I don't see enough variation in these people. They all are relatively all fit. They're relatively identically garbed, close enough that you could call it a uniform. It's unusual. Then there was this video that popped out, and I was concerned about this. Liberty Gin shows this Patriot Front group being arrested. Once again, see all these people identical, but notice that they're all still wearing their face masks. They still have backpacks on. Likely they still have stuff in their pockets, and all the police are looking away from them. And that bothers me. Is this, and I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist because I'm not, this just looks fishy, and I'm concerned. What's going on here? A lot of people have said they're feds. They could just be a relatively well-organized militia group. I would like to know more. Not because I have particularly any common cause with the Patriot Front, but because this just looks fishy as all get out. What's going on here? And I would like to know if this looks normal to an actual police officer, somebody I could trust. And that's why I was hoping to hear about that sooner than this. But let's go ahead and move on. I've got one more item to talk about for just a moment or two here. This is a joint Democratic leadership statement on the motion to vacate. You're familiar already with the motion to vacate. That is what unseated Kevin McCarthy from the speakership in the House. The Democrats have released the following statement. House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democratic Whip Catherine Clark, and Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar released the following statement upon the completion of the House Democratic Caucus meeting. For months, House Republicans irresponsibly delayed critical security assistance to our Democratic allies in Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific, while simultaneously blocking humanitarian assistance to civilians in harm's way in places like Gaza, Haiti, and the Sudan. Thanks to a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans led by President Biden, we are finally able to meet the national security needs of the American people. From the very beginning of this Congress, House Democrats have put people over politics and found bipartisan common ground with traditional Republicans in order to deliver real results. At the same time, House Democrats have aggressively pushed back against MAGA extremism. We will continue to do just that. At this moment, upon completion of our national security work, the time has come to turn the page on this chapter of pro-Putin Republican obstruction. We will vote to table Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate the chair. If she invokes the motion, it will not succeed. This is interesting from several perspectives. Obviously, certain people like Representative Massey here absolutely went ballistic over these types of things. And Massey is generally a reliably conservative voice most of the time. The thing is, I've been watching his statements lately, and he has been getting a little bit off on a little bit off the I don't know, off a little off. That's all I can say about that. I've got a phone call coming in I just need to check on here. I'm going to put you on mute here for a second. Sorry, call from my son. I was concerned there might be something wrong there. Anyway, about this motion to vacate. The Democrats have seen how long it takes the Republicans to get a new speaker elected. If they want to get anything done, they're going to have to stick with the speaker they got. And I want to remind everybody that the Speaker of the House is not the Speaker of the Republican House or the Speaker of the Democrat House. They're the Speaker of the House. They're second in line for the presidency if the president and vice president are somehow taken out of the chain. So it's a Speaker of the House. Marjorie Taylor Greene went ballistic as well and said she was going to call for the motion to vacate to demonstrate that this was the uniparty acting here. And so we'll see how that goes probably over the next few days. The end result, though, is that we have a bipartisan group of a minority of Republicans, I would say, at this point in time, and a majority, in fact, the entire Democrat caucus, most likely, that are willing to put their reputation on the line after getting some bipartisan work done. Will it pay off in the end? I don't know. I just am pointing out that this is an interesting end result. What happened with Speaker Johnson? He made that sudden 180. What brought him around? Now, I hate to look a gift horse in the mouth. Don't get me wrong. But the MAGA caucus in the House is going absolutely ballistic. And they are trying to gin up everything they can on this. And it's clear that the fact that there was a bipartisan group that could get some business done absolutely steams their cookies. Okay, I just mixed some metaphors there. But still, it's fun. That's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about for today. And I do realize I kind of went off into a whole bunch of different things. Let me know what you think of this combination in the comments below, because I want to know if you are interested in seeing this type of information and my commentary on it. I absolutely want to state that I do see a bright future for the United States. I believe that we have got many great things in our future, that I am hopeful. I'm always hopeful. And if things go well, we might see a new era where we're all pulling towards the same goals. It's going to be a rough ride, though, because some weak men have made some hard times. But it's time for the strong men to rise up. And they are, slowly but surely. They're seeing the issues and they're rising up to try and save our nation, a little at a time. Now I'm going to take a moment here, just read through the comments that kind of was burning through a bunch of things. Paul, I did see your things, your comments there. I absolutely appreciate them. And Stephen, same with you. Yes, it was stroke rehabilitation. You're correct. And the comments on Hamas, spot on. Stephen, I really hadn't thought about that. When Nazis gather, U.S. policy usually sees counter protests as more of a threat because the Nazis are almost always heavily outnumbered. We had something similar like to that in over in where I was living at the time, just a few miles down the road. Had a funeral going for a soldier who had fallen in battle, and this extremist group showed up, and they were heavily outnumbered. People who love their country and love freedom outnumber those who want to take it away. And that's kind of everything at this point. And Paul, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't expect that the group's going to get any larger at this rate, at least not at any significantly fast rate. But at some point in time, if the group gets big enough, I'm going to have to split these into two separate pieces, because the news of Ukraine deserves its own video. It's just a matter of me having time to be able to pull it off. And if that's how it goes, well, we'll just split it off and I'll do separate videos for this other material, the other things going on. And yeah, I think that'll work out in the end. And that's again everything. You have a great rest of your day. Thanks again. We'll see you on the next video.